The late afternoon settled over the fields of rural Missouri with the weight of a storm that hadn't yet broken. The sky, burned in deep shades of gold and rust, stretched over the land like a fading memory. Elwood Mercer, quiet and sun-worn, leaned against the old wooden fence, the brim of his straw hat casting a shadow over his eyes. Beside him stood Briar, his Tennessee walking horse, a dark bay with near-black coat and a single white blaze on his forehead. The horse, strong and elegant, wore a weathered brown leather saddle, still polished with care. Briar wasn't just a workhorse. He was Elwood's only real companion. But something in the air felt different today, and Elwood felt it before he even heard the sound. A car. But not the kind that belonged on dirt roads like these. The soft crunch of gravel gave way to the sleek shine of a vintage convertible, too clean, too quiet, too out of place. It rolled to a stop just beyond the gate. A woman stepped out barefoot, wearing a white wedding dress that flowed as the wind brushed against it. She moved with intention, though her face betrayed a storm beneath the surface. Talia Whitaker, though Elwood didn't yet know her name, looked like someone who'd either run from something or been left behind. She locked eyes with him and spoke plainly. "I need to ride your horse. Just for a few minutes." Her voice was calm, but not empty. It held urgency, the kind that came from something deeply personal. Elwood didn't answer right away. He studied her the way a man like him did everything, carefully, without rushing. Then he looked at Briar. She stepped forward and reached out her hand. Elwood watched closely, ready to step in. But Briar lowered his head. He sniffed her palm and stood still. That alone said more than words could. Briar didn't take to strangers. Not ever. Elwood moved toward the gate, unlatched it, and watched in silence as she climbed into the saddle with a grace that suggested a long-lost familiarity. She rode slowly, the dress trailing behind her like a ghost, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the horizon. And in that moment, Elwood couldn't explain why, but something inside him shifted. When she returned, she dismounted gently, resting a hand on Briar's neck, her eyes glassy but dry. "Thank you," she said softly. "That meant more than I can explain." She turned back toward the car, but paused before getting in. "You're not going to ask why?" Elwood lifted his eyes toward her, steady and unreadable. "If you wanted to tell me, you would've." She gave the faintest smile, almost broken, and asked, "Can I come back tomorrow?" He nodded. No more words were needed. She stepped into the car, started the engine, and disappeared into the fading light, her presence lingering long after the dust settled. Elwood stayed there, still as the fence he leaned on, long after the sound of the engine vanished down the road. The sky had turned a deep violet now, and the silence had returned, but not quite the same. Something had been set in motion. He didn't know her name yet. Didn't know she was a missing heiress from one of the richest families on the East Coast. Didn't know she had vanished hours before a high-society wedding. And he certainly didn't know that by letting her ride that horse, he had stepped into the first chapter of a story that would unravel everything he thought he knew. About her, about himself, and about the secrets buried deep in their pasts. By late afternoon, the sky turned pale and quiet. Elwood stood near the barn, arms crossed, his eyes drawn to the curve in the road. He hadn't expected her to return, but something in him had waited. When the familiar hum of the convertible reached his ears, he didn't flinch. The car slowed near the gate, tires crunching over gravel. Talia stepped out, barefoot again, this time in a simple shirt and loose jeans. She looked less like a runaway bride and more like someone trying to disappear. She walked straight to Briar, who stepped forward to meet her. The tall Tennessee walking horse, dark with a white star on his forehead, nuzzled her gently. Elwood watched in silence. The connection between them felt deeper than it should. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she placed her forehead against Briar's neck and closed her eyes, breathing him in like he was the only steady thing left in the world. "My dad had a horse like him," she said softly. "He'd ride to clear his head. Out there, he was real." She paused, eyes distant. "He died when I was 16. After that, I was groomed to be something else." Her voice faded, but Elwood understood more than she said. She wasn't just running from a wedding. She was running from a life that never belonged to her. "I was supposed to say, 'I do' yesterday," she added. "Big wedding. Society nonsense. My mother called it a perfect match. But he didn't know me. Neither did I." Her tone was bitter but calm. "When I saw your horse, I remembered who I used to be, before I started pretending for everyone else." Elwood shifted his weight. "You picked quite a place to remember." Talia gave a faint smile. "I didn't pick it. I just stopped. It felt right." He nodded once, slow. "You hungry?" She blinked, surprised. "Yeah. Haven't eaten since yesterday." He turned toward the house. "I got stew. Not fancy, but warm." They walked without speaking. The silence felt softer now. Talia looked around the land, the barn, the fading sky, all so far from her world, yet oddly comforting. As they reached the porch, she paused. "Thanks for not asking too much." Elwood opened the door, not looking back. Sometimes silence says more. Inside, something was beginning, even if neither of them could name it yet. The kitchen was small, but warm. Old wooden cabinets, a stove with chipped paint, and a table that had seen better days. Elwood ladled stew into 2 bowls, moving slowly, like someone used to eating alone. Talia sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. The scent of potatoes, carrots, and beef filled the room. Simple, hearty food. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful. She didn't speak. Neither did he. And somehow, the silence didn't feel strange. After a while, Talia glanced around. "You live here all alone?" she asked. Elwood nodded, chewing. "Been that way for a while." She wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes warned her not to push. Not yet. She looked out the small window, where the last light of day painted the fence in gold. Briar stood by the gate, as if still waiting. "Your horse," she said quietly. "He's special." Elwood followed her gaze. "Yeah. He knows things before I do." She leaned back, bowl half empty. "My whole life's been loud," she said. "Hotels, reporters, charity galas. Always dressed up. Always watched." She paused. "This place, the quiet, it feels like the first real thing I've touched in years." Elwood didn't respond. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her, steady, grounded, was answer enough. Talia wondered what it would be like to stay here. Just for a while. Just long enough to remember who she was before the world claimed her name. Then her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, screen cracked, battery nearly dead. 12 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 from her mother. 1 from someone she wished she'd never see again. Elwood watched her expression shift, from peace to panic, then back to control. She locked the phone without listening. Slid it across the table like it was poison. "They're looking for me," she said, almost to herself. "But I'm not ready to be found." Elwood stood and took both bowls to the sink. "Well, they won't find you here unless you want 'em to." Talia looked at him, grateful. Not just for the words, but for the way he said them, like a promise that didn't need drama. He didn't offer rescue. He offered quiet. That was enough. For now. She rose from her seat. "Do you mind if I sleep in the car tonight?" He wiped his hands on a dish towel. "You'll sleep in the guest room. door locks from the inside. Later, as she lay on the small bed with the creaky frame, Talia stared at the wooden ceiling. She heard the wind moving through the fields, and the soft, steady breath of Briar outside the window. She still didn't know what she would do tomorrow, or the next day. But for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Not hidden. Not protected. Just still. And sometimes, that's the beginning of healing. Not the escape itself, but the silence that follows it. Morning came with soft light filtering through the thin curtains. Talia woke early, unsure of what had pulled her from sleep. A noise, a dream, or maybe the strange quiet she was still getting used to. She sat up in the narrow bed and listened. No traffic. No voices. Just the distant clink of tools and the occasional low whinny from Briar outside. For a few moments, she didn't move. This house, though old and creaking, felt like it was holding its breath with her. Safe, but temporary. She stepped into the kitchen and found Elwood already outside, fixing a section of fence that had leaned during the night wind. She walked out barefoot, arms wrapped around herself despite the rising warmth. "Need help?" she asked. He glanced up, squinting against the sun. "Only if you know how to hold a post straight." She smiled. It felt strange, like using a muscle she hadn't trusted in years. She knelt in the dirt and held the wooden post as he hammered it into the ground, neither of them talking, but working in rhythm. After a while, she sat back, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You know, you still don't know my last name," she said. Elwood didn't look at her. "Don't need it." Talia tilted her head. "You really don't care who I am?" He shrugged. "If you're hiding, you've got a reason. If you're lying, the truth'll come out on its own." His words weren't threatening, just honest. And that honesty hit her harder than any accusation ever had. No one in her world would ever say that. Not without wanting something in return. Later, over coffee on the porch, Talia stared at the distant hills. "My real last name, it's not Whitaker," she said. Elwood didn't react. She looked down at her mug. "It's Holloway. My family owns most of the Northeast timber supply, along with half a dozen corporations. My mother's name opens doors that stay shut for others." She paused. "I don't say it out loud very often." Elwood finally spoke. "You don't have to. Not here." The quiet returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, the kind you don't need to explain. She looked over at Briar grazing calmly in the pasture. "He makes it easier to breathe," she said. Elwood followed her gaze. "That horse doesn't judge, just listens." They both knew she wasn't only talking about the horse. And for a moment, Talia allowed herself to wonder, what if this wasn't just a place to hide? What if this was a place to start over? But that thought was short-lived. As the sun climbed higher, a shadow appeared on the horizon, the faint dust trail of another car coming down the road. Talia's eyes narrowed. "That's not yours, is it?" Elwood stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "No, it ain't." Her pulse quickened. Every part of her that had just begun to settle now stood on edge. The past had found her trail, and it was arriving faster than either of them were ready for. The car got closer, fast. Too fast for someone just passing through. Talia stepped off the porch, her eyes locked on the thin line of dust rising behind the vehicle. It wasn't one of her family's. It wasn't luxury. It was dark, dusty, with a dented front bumper. Rental. Unmarked. That made it worse. She turned to Elwood, heart racing. "I think they sent someone who doesn't want to be seen." He nodded once, slowly, then stepped off the porch without a word, moving toward the gate like a man preparing for a storm. The car came to a slow crawl near the fence. A man stepped out, mid-40s, lean build, sunglasses, wearing a plain black polo tucked into jeans that were too clean for farm work. His presence was sharp, rehearsed. He didn't smile. "Miss Whitaker," he said flatly. "Or Holloway. Whichever version you're using today." Talia froze. The sound of her real name, spoken so bluntly in this quiet place, cracked something inside her. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone hired to make sure you don't forget who you are," he replied. His eyes flicked briefly to Elwood, then back to her. "We'd like you to come home." Now, Elwood didn't speak. He just stepped forward, placing himself half a step between Talia and the man. Not aggressively, just enough to be noticed. The man smirked. "You must be the cowboy." Talia found her voice. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Tell them that." The man's expression shifted slightly. Not anger, just calculation. "I'm not here to ask, Talia. I'm here to remind you how quickly everything can fall apart. Your family doesn't like messes. This." He gestured at the house, the barn, the horse in the field. "This is a mess." Talia felt her pulse in her throat. Her jaw clenched. "You can tell them I said no. And if they want to talk to me, they can do it themselves." The man tilted his head. "They don't want to talk. They want control." He turned to go. "But I'll give you one day. After that, someone else comes. And he won't knock." With that, he got in the car and drove off, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt physical. The dust from his tires lingered in the air long after the engine disappeared. Elwood stood still, staring down the road. Talia's breath finally returned. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think they'd find me this fast." Elwood looked at her. "They were already looking before you left. You just gave them a reason to look harder." She lowered her eyes. "I don't want to run again. But I don't know how to stay without putting you in danger." Elwood didn't flinch. "That man doesn't scare me. But I need to know, if you stay, are you staying for yourself, or just because you've got nowhere else to go?" The question hung in the air like a weight neither of them could lift. Briar let out a soft huff from the pasture, as if sensing the shift. Talia didn't answer right away. She didn't know how. But deep down, something inside her had already started to decide. Not out of fear. Not out of escape. But because for the first time in years, she wasn't being pulled by expectation. She was standing still. And sometimes, stillness is louder than any scream. The night had been long. The wind howled from the east, rattling the trees and whistling through the cracks in the house. Talia hadn't slept. She sat on the small bed, eyes fixed on the darkness, listening to every noise outside. The sound of branches scraping against the window felt like a warning, a reminder that the peace she had found here was fragile. Outside, Elwood hadn't slept either. Sitting on the porch, a cup of cold coffee in his hand, he stared at the horizon as if waiting for something, or someone. Briar paced in the pasture, snorting softly. It was as if the horse sensed the weight of the decision hanging over the house. When the first rays of sunlight touched the fields, Talia finally stood up. She stepped out of the house in silence and found Elwood in the same spot. He didn't have to ask. She already had the answer written all over her face. "I'm staying," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "But I don't know what that means yet." Elwood nodded slowly. He took a sip of his coffee and replied, "It means that, from now on, every choice is yours." She felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time, no one was telling her what she had to do. Elwood spent most of the day in the barn, while Talia tried to adjust to this new life. For the first time, she put on clothes that didn't belong to her old world: worn-out jeans, a loose button-up shirt of Elwood's, and an old pair of boots. When she looked at herself in the small mirror in her room, she barely recognized the girl staring back. And for the first time in a long while, She liked what she saw. The day passed slowly, the quiet rhythm of farm life replacing the chaos she had once known. She fed the horses, swept the barn, and learned to listen to the land. Every step she took here felt real in a way nothing else ever had. By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills, she had almost forgotten the weight that still lingered in the back of her mind, the weight of everything she had left behind. As she passed by the barn that evening, she heard the steady sound of something being carved. Curious, she stepped inside. Elwood was sitting on a wooden bench, a knife in his hand, slowly etching something into a piece of wood. "What are you doing?" she asked. He glanced up at her, then back at the wood. His hands were steady, his movements deliberate. "Carving a name," he said simply. She stepped closer and saw the letters taking shape beneath the blade. It was her last name, Holloway, etched deep into the grain of the wood. She swallowed hard. That name had always felt like a chain around her neck, something that defined her in ways she never asked for. But now, here, it looked different. "It's who you are," Elwood said, continuing his work. "But not in the way they told you to be." She didn't know how to respond. But somehow, those words settled something deep inside her. The air was dry, thick with the scent of dust and sun-baked earth. A faint rumbling in the distance made Briar lift his head in the pasture, ears flicking toward the sound. Talia felt it, too, a vibration beneath her feet, a shift in the stillness. She turned toward the road just in time to see the dust rise, a black car slicing through the quiet like a blade. Her stomach tightened. She knew that car. Sleek, expensive, a perfect reflection of the world she had left behind. It slowed as it neared the house, rolling to a stop with an unsettling finality. The engine cut off, and for a long, silent moment, nothing happened. Then, the door opened. Talia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to see the face to know who it was. The way she stepped out, the way her presence seemed to command the very air around her. It could only be one person. Her mother. Talia barely whispered the word, but it echoed inside her like a warning bell. The woman was dressed impeccably, as always. A tailored navy dress, high heels that didn't belong anywhere near a place like this. She moved across the uneven ground with practiced grace, as if she could bend even the dirt to her will. Beside her, a man in a gray suit adjusted his tie, clutching a black leather folder against his chest. A lawyer. Of course. Talia should have known her mother wouldn't come alone. Her mother exhaled, slow and deliberate, the way she always did when she was about to say something final. Her sharp eyes swept over the ranch, over Elwood, over Talia, taking everything in, calculating. Then, her gaze settled fully on her daughter. "Enough of this nonsense, Talia," she said, her voice smooth as polished steel. "It's time to come home." The silence that followed her mother's words was thick, stretching between them like a canyon. Talia felt her pulse hammering in her ears, but she refused to let it show. She had spent years under this woman's gaze, learning to keep her expression neutral, her emotions buried deep. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't a powerless girl standing in a marble-floored hallway, waiting for orders. She was here, on solid ground, and she wasn't leaving. Her mother sighed, as if Talia's defiance was nothing more than an inconvenience. She turned slightly and gave the lawyer a small nod. That was all it took. He stepped forward, opening the sleek black folder and pulling out a thick stack of papers. With a practiced motion, he extended them toward Talia, his expression unreadable. "If you won't come willingly," her mother said, her voice cool and measured, "perhaps this will make you reconsider." Talia hesitated before taking the documents, her fingers gripping the edges as she skimmed over the words. At first, the legal jargon blurred together, but then her stomach clenched. She knew exactly what this was. A petition. A formal request to have her declared mentally unfit to make her own decisions. If approved, they could force her back. institutionalize her if they wanted to. Strip away everything, her freedom, her choices, her very identity, until there was nothing left of her but the girl they had tried to mold her into. Her throat went dry. The weight of the papers in her hands felt suffocating, like they were pressing down on her chest. She looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. There was no warmth there, no flicker of doubt. Just cold certainty. But before she could speak, Elwood stepped forward. His presence was steady, grounding. He didn't look at the papers. He didn't even look at Talia. His eyes were locked on her mother, calm but unyielding. "If she were weak," he said, his voice slow and deliberate, "she would have run back to you the moment things got hard. But look at her. Do you really think you can break her?" For the first time, something shifted in her mother's expression. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even doubt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold resolve. "And you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "What exactly are you to her?" Elwood didn't blink. "I'm just someone who doesn't need to control her to keep her close." The words hit harder than Talia expected. She swallowed against the sudden tightness in her chest. Slowly, deliberately, she took the papers and tore them in half. Then again, and again, until the pieces drifted to the ground between them. Her mother's face hardened. "If you do this," she warned, "you are no longer a Holloway." Talia exhaled, a slow, steady breath. Then, for the first time in her life, she smiled at her mother. Not out of politeness, not out of fear, but because she felt truly free. "I never really was," she said simply. The moment stretched between them, a final, unspoken goodbye. Then, without another word, her mother turned on her heel, walked back to the car, and disappeared down the dusty road, taking the last remnants of Talia's old life with her. The dust from her mother's car lingered in the air long after it had disappeared down the road. Talia stood motionless, staring at the empty space where the vehicle had been, as if expecting some last-minute hesitation, some final attempt to pull her back. But none came. The weight pressing on her chest slowly began to lift, replaced by something foreign, something she barely recognized. Freedom. Elwood remained silent beside her, his steady presence a quiet reassurance. He didn't ask if she was okay, didn't offer hollow words of comfort. He simply waited, letting her process it on her own terms. Eventually, Talia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and turned to face him. "I guess that's it," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong to them anymore." Elwood studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the wooden plaque he had carved the day before, the one with her name, Holloway, etched deep into the grain. With slow, deliberate steps, he walked over to it, picked up his knife, and carved a single deep line through the name, striking it out. Then, below it, he began carving something new. Talia stepped closer, watching as the letters took shape beneath his blade. When he finished, she felt her throat tighten. Talia Brooks. It was simple, ordinary, and yet it meant everything. A name she chose. A name that wasn't tied to wealth, expectations, or a legacy she never wanted. She ran her fingers over the fresh carving, feeling the rough edges of the letters. A slow smile tugged at her lips. "This place isn't easy," Elwood said, stepping back and wiping his knife clean. "There'll be hard days. Times you'll want to run. But if you stay, if you build something here, it'll be yours. No one else's." Talia swallowed hard, emotion swelling in her chest. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't yet see. But for the first time in her life, the future was hers to shape. She turned to Elwood, the wind shifting through the open fields behind her, carrying away the last remnants of the girl she used to be. "I'm staying," she said, her voice steady. "And this time it's my choice."